When they looked at me and said, "We wish you were never born," I felt my heart shatter into a million pieces. But as the entire restaurant stared, something inside me didn't break, it hardened. My response that night wasn't a tragedy, it was a reckoning. My name is Deborah, and at 45 years old, I've learned that some scars don't fade. They just teach you where you've been. My story isn't about the wound itself, but about what grew from it. It begins on a warm June evening at the Naperville Country Club, a place that smelled of old money, freshly cut grass, and unspoken expectations. The low murmur of polite conversation filled the air, punctuated by the gentle clinking of silverware against fine china. It was my college graduation dinner, meant to be the crowning achievement of my 22 years of trying to be the daughter my parents, Walter and Dorothy, always wanted. I was wearing a navy blue dress, clutching my honors diploma from Northwestern, still believing that this piece of paper might finally be enough. My father stood, tapping his champagne flute for a toast. The room fell into a respectful hush. He looked around at the assembled guests, his business partners, their wives, all pillars of our community. Then his eyes settled on me, cold and assessing. "To Deborah," he began, and for a fleeting moment, I felt a surge of hope. "Today, she graduates. And as we look at the children of our friends who are heading to law school and Wall Street, we have to be honest." He paused, letting the silence hang in the air. "Sometimes, we wish you were never born. Then we wouldn't have to explain your disappointing choices to everyone." The words didn't just hang there, they landed like stones, shattering the fragile illusion of our perfect family. If you've ever felt like your greatest moments were invisible to the people who are supposed to celebrate you the most, let me know you're here by simply typing the city you're watching from in the comments. I want to see how far this story of finding your voice can travel. In the deafening silence that followed my father's words, you could have heard a pin drop on the thick, patterned carpet of the country club. I saw it all in slow motion. The sympathetic, horrified glances from Mrs. Gable at the next table, the way Mr. Henderson suddenly found his lobster fascinating, the waiter who froze mid-step, holding a silver tray. My mother, Dorothy, simply took a delicate sip of her Chardonnay, a silent endorsement of her husband's cruelty. They expected tears. They expected a quiet, humiliated retreat. For 22 years, that had been my role. Absorb the disappointment and try harder next time. But in that moment, something different happened. The sharp, searing pain was there, but underneath it, a strange and powerful calm began to rise, like bedrock emerging from a receding tide. It wasn't sadness that was solidifying inside me, it was resolve. I realized they had finally given me a gift, the gift of clarity. They would never change. They would never see me. And I was done trying to make them. As I sat there, a plan began to form, not a loud, angry one, but something quiet, precise, and devastating. I wouldn't scream or cry. I would dismantle their world from the inside out, using their own tools, reputation, appearances, and the opinions of the very people they were performing for tonight. This wasn't just a story of heartbreak. It was the beginning of one of those family revenge stories you hear about. Only this one was mine. If you've ever had a moment where you knew you couldn't stay silent a second longer, a moment where you had to become your own hero, subscribe to this channel. This is a community for those of us who learn to save ourselves. To understand the cold precision of my father's words that night, you have to understand the world they built around us. Our life in Naperville, Illinois, wasn't just a life, it was a performance. We lived in a sprawling, colonial-style house on a street where every lawn was an immaculate green carpet and silence was a status symbol. From the outside, we were the American dream personified. My father, Walter, was a partner at a prestigious Chicago law firm, a man who measured his worth in billable hours and the envy of his peers. My mother, Dorothy, wasn't just a homemaker. She was the chairwoman of 3 different charity boards, not out of any sense of altruism, but because philanthropy was the social currency of our circle. Every gala, every fundraiser, was another opportunity to be seen, to network, to climb another rung on the social ladder. In this world, children were not raised, they were molded. We were extensions of our parents' ambition, our successes were their bragging rights, and our failures were their public shame. My brother, a natural athlete who went on to play college football, fit their mold perfectly. He was an easy asset. I, on the other hand, was a problem to be solved. My quiet nature, my love for books and art, these were not qualities they could showcase at a dinner party. My value was conditional, tied directly to my ability to reflect their glory. It wasn't a home, it was a gilded cage where the price of admission was your own soul, and I had been paying it my entire life. This pressure to perform wasn't a once-a-year evaluation. It was the very air I breathed, a constant, low-grade poison. It was a death by 1,000 cuts, tiny wounds that accumulated over years until they felt like a mortal injury. I remember being 16, standing in front of a mirror in a beautiful emerald green prom dress, feeling genuinely pretty for the first time. My mother walked in, not seeing my smile, but seeing a project. "Don't you think that color washes you out, Debbie?" she'd said, her voice clinical. "Walter's law partner will be there with his son. We need you to look your best." First impressions are everything. It was never about me feeling good. It was about how my appearance served her social agenda. When I poured my heart into the high school theater program, finding a home on the stage, they called it a frivolous distraction. Debate club looks better on a Yale application. My father would stay over dinner, not asking about my passion, but calculating its value. Even my friendships were assets to be managed. "Brenda is a nice enough girl," my mother once conceded, "but her father is just a high school teacher. You should be spending more time with the girls from the golf club." It's called networking, dear. Every choice, every friendship, every part of me was put through their cold calculus of social gain. I wasn't a daughter. I was a long-term investment they felt was yielding poor returns. Let me know in the comments, were you the scapegoat in your family, the one who could never do anything right? Or were you the golden child, the one who carried the crushing weight of perfection? Type scapegoat if you always felt like the problem, or golden child if the pressure to be their star was your burden. I'm curious to see the balance in our community here, but in that cold, transactional world, there was an escape, a sanctuary. It was my grandmother Beatrice's small brick house in Aurora, a 45-minute drive that felt like crossing into another dimension. Her home smelled of lemon polish and old books, a stark contrast to the sterile, scentless air of our house in Naperville. Beatrice was my father's mother, but she was made of entirely different material. Where my parents saw a balance sheet, she saw a soul. She never asked about my grades or my social standing. Instead, she'd ask, "What have you been reading, Deborah? What have you been creating?" In her cozy living room, surrounded by mismatched furniture and shelves overflowing with novels, she was the only person who saw my interest in art history not as a liability, but as a gift. To understand art is to understand humanity, she'd tell me over cups of Earl Grey tea. It's a language far more honest than any legal contract. She knew her son. She knew he would never fund a passion he couldn't brag about at the golf club. So, during my junior year of high school, she took me to open a secret savings account. "This is your soul money, my dear," she whispered, her hand over mine as she made the first deposit. "This is for the woman you are meant to become, not the one they are trying to build. When the time comes, you use this to follow your own heart." It was our beautiful, rebellious secret, a lifeline that made me believe another kind of life was possible. That secret fund, that beautiful act of defiance, was the only reason I was able to enroll at Northwestern as an art history major. For 2 years, I lived a double life. I'd tell my parents about my general education classes, letting them believe I was on a practical path, while I spent my days immersed in the worlds of Renaissance painters and modernist sculptors. For the first time, I felt like I was truly myself. But that fragile peace shattered during the winter of my sophomore year. I got a call in the middle of the night. It was my father. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "Your grandmother is gone," he said. "Massive heart attack. She didn't feel a thing." Just like that, my sanctuary, my ally, my secret keeper was gone. The grief was a physical weight, but beneath it was a cold, creeping panic. The soul money was nearly gone. It was enough to get me this far, but not enough to finish. I had no choice. A week after the funeral, I sat in my father's imposing home office, the scent of leather and judgment thick in the air. With my mother watching from the doorway, I laid it all out, my major, my passion, my need for their help to finish my degree. They didn't offer a word of comfort for my loss. Instead, I saw a flicker of triumph in my father's eyes. He finally had me trapped. "We will pay for the remainder of your education," he said, leaning back in his leather chair. "On one condition. You switch your major to business, effective next semester. We will not invest another dime in this frivolous nonsense. This is your chance to correct your mistake, Deborah." But I didn't take his deal. For the first time in my life, I chose myself. I spent the next 2 years living on cheap ramen and caffeine, taking out staggering student loans, and working 2 jobs, one at the university library and another waiting tables to pay for the tuition my grandmother's fund no longer covered. I graduated with honors, exhausted but proud. And that brings us back to that polished mahogany table at the Naperville Country Club. The dinner wasn't a celebration. It was a final, public demonstration of their disapproval, a stage for my failure. The breaking point, the final snap, came when one of my mother's friends, a woman named Beverly, leaned across the table with a bright, oblivious smile. "So, Debbie," she chirped, "with that lovely art history degree, what are your plans? The Art Institute of Chicago, I hope?" Before I could even open my mouth to answer, my father held up his hand, silencing me. He stood up, champagne flute in hand. "Before she answers," he announced, his voice carrying across the quiet dining room, "I'd like to make a toast." And that's when he delivered the line, the one that would sever our ties forever. As we look at the children of our friends heading to law school and Wall Street, we have to be honest. Sometimes, we wish you were never born. Then we wouldn't have to explain your disappointing choices to everyone. He said it with a cold, matter-of-fact finality, a judgment delivered from on high. If you have ever been publicly belittled by the very people who are supposed to be your safe harbor, hit that like button. It's a silent signal to the algorithm and to each other that these stories need to be heard, that this pain is real, and that none of us are alone in it. My father sat down, a smug, satisfied look on his face. The public execution was complete. He and my mother exchanged a look, waiting for the familiar sight of my shoulders slumping in defeat, for the sting of tears in my eyes. But the tears didn't come. Instead, something else did. A profound, almost shocking sense of peace. His words hadn't just been an insult, they had been an absolution. He had severed the final, invisible thread of hope that had bound me to them for 22 years. The need for their approval, a constant, aching hunger my entire life, vanished in an instant. I was free. With a calmness that surprised even me, I folded my cloth napkin and placed it deliberately on the table beside my untouched plate of filet mignon. I pushed my chair back, the legs making no sound on the thick rug, and stood. My movements were slow, measured, and graceful. Every eye in that silent room was on me. I looked directly at my father, then my mother, and for the first time, I didn't see figures of authority. I just saw 2 deeply unhappy people. When I spoke, my voice wasn't a shout or a sob. It was quiet, clear, and carried the weight of absolute finality. "Thank you, Father," I said, my tone even. "For your honesty, you've given me the one gift I never knew I needed." I let that sink in before delivering the final line. "So, let me give you one in return. You wished I was never born. Well, your wish is granted. As of this moment, you no longer have a daughter." An audible gasp rippled through the room. My mother's face went pale, a mask of pure shock, while my father's flushed a deep, furious crimson. I didn't wait for their response. I simply turned, and with my head held high, I walked out of that dining room, out of the country club, and out of the life they had designed for me. The whispers of their friends followed me out the door, but for the first time, I didn't care what any of them thought. But that public declaration was only the beginning. My revenge wasn't going to be a single, emotional outburst. It was going to be a quiet, strategic demolition of the one thing they held sacred: their public image. That night, fueled by 2 decades of suppressed anger and a pot of black coffee, I executed the second phase of my plan. I went through my mother's old charity gala invitations and the country club's online member directory. I spent 2 hours compiling a meticulously curated email list. Every important business associate of my father, every influential woman on my mother's charity boards, every single person who had witnessed my humiliation at dinner. Then, I drafted the email. It was short, polite, and absolutely devastating. It read, "Dear friends and community members, thank you for celebrating with me tonight. Following a very clarifying toast, I am writing to inform you that I will be honoring my parents, Walter and Dorothy's, explicitly stated wish. To quote my father directly, they wish I was never born. Therefore, to unburden them from the disappointing choices of my existence, I am permanently withdrawing from their lives. I wish them peace. Sincerely, Deborah." I hit send at 2 a.m. If you believe that the most powerful revenge isn't a loud argument but a quiet, irrefutable truth, type the word truth in the comments below. Let's see that truth fill this space. I turned off my phone that night and slept for 10 hours, a deep, dreamless sleep of pure exhaustion and release. When I turned it back on the next morning, it was like opening a floodgate. 37 missed calls. Over 50 text messages. The fallout had begun. I made a fresh cup of coffee, sat on my small apartment floor, and began to listen to the voicemails. They were exactly what I expected, and in a strange way, exactly what I needed to hear. The first were from my father, his voice tight with rage, not a hint of remorse. "Deborah, you call me back this instant. Do you have any idea the damage you've done? I've had 6 calls from the club's board members this morning. You have embarrassed this family in a way I never thought possible. This public spectacle is childish and unforgivable." His anger wasn't about what he had said to me, it was about the fact that I had told people. Then came my mother's texts, a masterclass in emotional manipulation. "Debbie, honey, you're overreacting. Your father was just speaking his mind. You've always been so sensitive. By sending that email, you've put me in a terrible position." Beverly called, absolutely scandalized. "How could you be so cruel as to air our private disagreements like this?" As I read message after message, a cold, hard certainty settled in my bones. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of their cruelty. Their only concern was the fallout, the frantic, desperate need to control the narrative that I had stolen from them. They weren't sorry for the wound, they were just furious that it was bleeding in public. And that was the final, beautiful, terrible validation. I had been right all along. I blocked their numbers, one by one, and then turned my phone off, the silence in my tiny apartment feeling both liberating and terrifying. It was in that moment of heavy silence that I heard a knock on my door. It wasn't my parents, they would have buzzed relentlessly from downstairs. It was my friend, Brenda. She was standing there holding a greasy bag of takeout pizza, and behind her was our friend Frank, holding a 6-pack of beer. They didn't even ask what was wrong. Brenda just took one look at my face, dropped the pizza on the counter, and pulled me into a hug that felt more real than any hug my own mother had ever given me. I told them everything, the words tumbling out in a messy, tearful confession, the dinner, the toast, the email. Brenda's reaction was a blaze of protective fury. "I knew they were cold," she seethed, "but this is next-level evil. Good for you for burning it all down." Frank, ever the pragmatist, just listened intently, his expression serious. When I finished, he didn't offer platitudes. He simply asked, "So, what's the next step in the exit plan?" In that moment, surrounded by the smell of cheap pizza, with my 2 best friends ready to go to war for me, I understood a profound truth. Family isn't about the blood you share. It's about who shows up when the world is falling apart. It's about who brings you pizza and helps you plot your escape. Walter and Dorothy may have given me life, but Brenda and Frank were the ones who were helping me start living it. If you have a chosen family, that one friend or group of people who has been your rock when everything else was crumbling, take a second to just write their name or initials in the comments. Let's fill this space with some gratitude for the families we build for ourselves. Frank's question wasn't hypothetical. It was a call to action. And I had an answer. "Austin," I said. A surprising certainty in my voice. "I'm moving to Austin, Texas." I'd always been drawn to its reputation for creativity and independence, everything my life in Naperville was not. The next 2 weeks were a blur of organized chaos. My escape was a 3-pronged attack. First, the digital front. Frank, a low-key genius in IT, helped me systematically erase my online life. My old social media accounts vanished, my phone number was changed, and new, untraceable email addresses were created. I became a ghost online. Second, the physical purge. Brenda and I went through my apartment with ruthless efficiency. We sold the stiff, formal furniture my parents had bought me, a symbolic cleansing of their influence. I kept my books, my clothes, and the art supplies I'd hidden in the back of my closet for years. Everything I truly owned, my entire life, now fit into 12 cardboard boxes. Finally, the escape vehicle, my trusty 10-year-old Honda Civic. We packed it to the ceiling, leaving just enough room for me in the driver's seat. The morning I left, under the cloak of a pre-dawn sky, Brenda and Frank were there. We didn't say much. The hugs were tight and tearful. As I pulled out of my driveway and saw Naperville shrink in my rearview mirror, I didn't feel sadness. I felt the exhilarating, terrifying thrill of a blank page. The 1,100-mile drive south was a pilgrimage. With every mile that passed, I felt the weight of my parents' expectations dissolving into the open road behind me. It was the first time in my life that the only voice telling me where to go was my own. The next 2 years in Austin were like learning to breathe after a lifetime of being held underwater. I got a small, sun-drenched apartment in the Bolden Creek neighborhood, filled it with mismatched furniture from thrift stores, and painted one wall a brilliant, unapologetic turquoise. I found a job managing a small, independent art gallery, a place where my passion for art history was an asset, not an embarrassment. I made friends who knew nothing of the Johnsons of Naperville, they just knew Deborah. The woman who could tell you the story behind any painting and made a surprisingly good margarita. For the first time, I wasn't anyone's daughter or anyone's disappointment, I was just me. The piece was so complete that when the email arrived, it felt like a ghost appearing in broad daylight. It was from my father. They had found my work email on the gallery's website. The message was brief, cold, and stripped of any emotion. Your mother and I will be in Austin for a legal conference next weekend. We have cleared our schedule for Saturday morning. We would like to meet with you. There was no apology, no warmth, just an assumption of compliance. For a fleeting second, the old, familiar knot of dread tightened in my stomach. The 16-year-old girl who just wanted their approval resurfaced, terrified. But then, the woman I had become over the last 2 years pushed her gently aside. I wasn't that girl anymore. I realized I didn't have to go. But a part of me knew I needed to. Not for them. For me. This was the final exam. If you've ever had to face someone from your past and draw a hard line in the sand to protect the peace you've built, I want you to simply type MY terms in the comments. It's a declaration that you are the one in control of your own story now. I replied to his email with a simple, direct response. I can meet at Joe's Coffee on South Congress, Saturday at 10 a.m. I have another engagement at 10:30. I set the terms. A public place. A strict time limit. This was not a negotiation. I arrived early, chose a table outside under the shade of a live oak, and watched the vibrant, eclectic life of Austin pass by. I felt a sense of calm I'd never known in their presence. When they arrived, they looked like foreigners in a strange land. My father, in his pressed golf shirt, and my mother, in a stiff linen dress, seemed muted and out of place against the colorful backdrop of the city I now called home. "Debbie," my mother said, her voice laced with a familiar critical tone as she eyed my simple t-shirt and jeans. "You look casual." The small talk was excruciating. They spoke of their flight, the weather, a colleague my father had at the University of Texas. Finally, I cut through the noise. "Why are you here?" I asked, my voice even. My father cleared his throat. "It's been 2 years, Deborah. This estrangement has gone on long enough. People in Naperville still ask about you. The holidays are awkward. It's time to put this behind us." There it was. Not remorse. Not an apology. Just a complaint about their social inconvenience. "I see," I said, taking a slow sip of my coffee. "So, you're here because my absence is reflecting poorly on you." "That's an unfair characterization," my mother protested weakly. "Is it?" I countered. "You haven't asked me a single question about my life here. Not about my job, my friends, my happiness. You are here to fix an image problem." I leaned forward, my voice dropping but losing none of its intensity. "The daughter you want back doesn't exist anymore. I'm not an extension of your ambitions. I'm a person. and my peace is no longer negotiable. They sat there, stunned into silence, unable to process this version of me who held all the power. I looked at my watch. "My 30 minutes are up," I said, standing from the table. It was illuminating to see you both. Goodbye. I didn't wait for a response. I turned and walked away, disappearing into the vibrant Austin crowd, leaving them behind in a city that wasn't theirs, in a life that was no longer theirs to comment on. As I walked down the sunny street, I didn't feel anger or even sadness. I felt a profound sense of lightness. The final, invisible chains had turned to dust. I finally understood that the cruelty I had endured my whole life had never truly been about me. It wasn't because I was unlovable or inadequate. It was because their capacity for love was conditional, transactional, and ultimately too small to hold a daughter who wanted to be anything more than a reflection of them. Sending that email 2 years ago had felt like revenge, and perhaps it was. It was a necessary act of self-defense, a way to reclaim my own story. But walking away from that table, I realized the real revenge wasn't that single, calculated act. The true and lasting revenge was the life I had built since. It was the turquoise wall in my apartment. It was the joy I felt discussing art with strangers. It was the easy laughter I shared with friends who loved me for exactly who I was. The ultimate revenge wasn't burning their world down. It was building my own beautiful one from the ashes, a world so full of light and authenticity that their darkness simply couldn't touch it anymore. That peace is the greatest victory, a quiet, unshakable foundation built on the rubble of a life that was never truly mine. And that's why I wanted to share this story with you. For so many of us, the idea of family is supposed to mean safety, a harbor in the storm. But sometimes, the people who are supposed to be our harbor are the storm. And if that's your truth, I want you to hear this. You have the right to sail away. You have the right to build your own lighthouse on a distant shore. The justice you seek might not come in a dramatic, cinematic moment of reckoning. Sometimes, the most profound karma is letting people live with the consequences of their own character, trapped in the smallness of their own making, while you go on to build a life of expansive joy. Forgiveness, I've learned, isn't about them. It's not about absolving them or letting them back into your life. It is the ultimate act of self-preservation. It's about you finally putting down the heavy, jagged stones they forced you to carry, not because they deserve it, but because you deserve to walk freely, without the weight. Your worth is not a negotiation. It is not a reward for good behavior or a trophy to be earned through compliance. It is your birthright. The journey isn't about becoming worthy, it's about unbecoming everything the world wrongly taught you that you had to be to deserve love. If these stories of breaking free and forging your own path speak to the journey you are on, please subscribe and join our community. It's a space where we understand that our past does not have to be a life sentence. Thank you for listening. And please remember, you are, and always have been, more than enough.